Hey guys, I'm Jim. I edit photos. Thanks for stopping by. Today I'm in both On1 Photo Raw 2022 and Luminar AI, and that's because I want to compare the sky replacement technology in both products. Now, to be clear, your mileage may vary. That's what I'm finding. I'm having comments and questions from people that are finding things that are somewhat perhaps different than what I'm finding. So it really, I think, comes down to a number of different things, not the least of which is the light in every photo is different. Therefore, the ability for the product to grab the mask or to find the sky is a better way of saying it, can vary. And really, photo to photo, things are different. Sometimes On1 does some things that are a little bit better, and other times I'm finding Luminar is doing things that are better. I would say overall, Luminar is doing a better job in my experience, and that is, I think, simply because their technology has been out. It's, we're in, I don't know what, iteration 4 or something of the tool versus version 1.0 of On1. However, On1 does some interesting things, like gives you access to the mask. However, I'm finding that it's not perfectly accurate all the time, so you got to go do some refinement. Whereas Luminar, I'm finding that it's finding the sky more accurately more often. However, you don't have access to the mask, at least in this version. I think that you will in Neo, I think. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure you'll have access in Neo to the mask. So you got to use the sliders in Luminar AI, which do help. So they're different, and honestly, there's not really a good way to compare them because they're different. However, I thought, hey, at least I can do is a basic comparison on a handful of photos. Let's take a look at this first one. And by the way, I'm going to use one of my own skies, and I'm going to use that exact same sky on every single photo. So here's a shot from a town in Germany a number of years ago, and I'm using this sky. And it goes in, and honestly, it goes in pretty well. I mean, if you look around the edges here, I mean, it looks fine. It actually did a really good job. It's a little bit light around that spire on the top of that building, but honestly, that's a pretty good implementation. If I do the same thing in Luminar and go grab that exact same sky and stick that on there, you will find that it also does a pretty darn good job. There you go. And so again, around the edges, I mean, it looks pretty good. And also around that spire, I think it's done a good job there. Like that, I mean, it just looks like it's done a little bit better job. But again, we're kind of splitting hairs, for lack of a better word. So that's the first comparison. I think they came in, roughly about equal, maybe a little bit of a nod to Luminar in that case. Let's go to this photo, and I'm gonna go ahead and take that same sky, grab that, and stick it on here. Boom, there you go. Now what you find in this one, of course, and this is what I found in my first look or first impressions video about this tool, is that it is overriding some things in the sky at times. So the tops of these spires or whatever you want to call them on this, this is in Heidelberg, Germany, it's completely getting overwritten. Well, not completely, but it's pretty heavily getting overwritten. Let me go ahead and get that same photo here in Luminar, and let me grab that sky, and there you go, it's on. Now, if you look at that, that's coming through, I think, a whole lot cleaner, even like in the little bits there kind of behind and between the holes in that iron scroll work or whatever you call it, versus here, like that's a lot of that's getting overwritten. The other thing you'll notice is the lighting isn't automatic in On1, whereas in Luminar, the scene relighting is automatic. So when I put that sky in, the scene relighting takes place. So the foreground goes from that to that. Again, not a complete full comparison of one tool to the other. I mostly just want to walk through a few different photo examples and show you what I'm finding. Now, I would say that up here, some of these trees might not be perfectly well masked in, and over here, I think it looks pretty okay, especially like that one looks pretty good where it looks like the sky's behind it. Now here's a fun example. Once again, I'm gonna go grab that sky and let me get that, or may have noticed that those birds that were in the sky are completely gone. So there they are before, 6 or 7 birds, or whatever it is, 6 birds in the sky, 0 birds in the sky, and this is kind of going over that cow just a little bit, but I would say that overall the sky has gone in pretty nicely there, like I said, except for the cow, and again, except for covering up the birds. Now in Luminar, let's go take a look at that sky. There we go, stick that on there, and you can see two major differences here. The birds, clear, they look great. Luminar is recognizing those as, I guess, objects in the sky and therefore not overriding them, but the clouds underneath are still showing through quite a bit. So if you look at the before, you can see that line of clouds there, and if I turn the sky back on, you can see it's not being overwritten. Whereas here, if you look at the mask, you can tell that the mask is completely getting rid of those clouds. So it's identifying that sky pretty cleanly, except for the birds. And so, really in this case, I kind of need a combination. I want the birds to stay, but I don't want those clouds in that base image sky to be there. So I would say Luminar did a better job with the birds, but of course not as good of a job actually replacing the lower part of that sky. Okay, another image, this one with a reflection. Let's go ahead and get this sky up here. And boom, there we go. And I think it's gone in pretty well. But again, as I've seen in other images, let me zoom a little bit more. It does overwrite some of these thinner, finer details that are up in the sky. The top of this little tower section here, that's getting overwritten quite a bit. Now, I do need to go turn on the reflection. And when I do that, you'll see nothing really happen. Like it didn't really pick up the reflection. And so even if I drag the amount to 100, the only thing I'm seeing as a reflection is this section right there. And I'm not really sure why. It's not really getting me much of anything. So I would have to go about getting a reflection in this image in a completely different manner, which would be add a new layer and then add the sky, invert it or flip it, and then mask it in. So that would be how I would have to do it here in On1 because it's not picking up that reflection. And I would say it's done a pretty okay job here in the sky, but like I said, it is overriding some bits of those towers. Now over in Luminar, let's get that same sky and see how that goes. And there we go. In this case, it did pick up that sky. And if you look here, in fact, let me zoom in more than 100. Let me go to 200. If you look at some of these spires, they look pretty good. They're not completely covered up. Now, like around this one, there's a little bit of a halo or something. You'd need to fix that with some of the tools. Again, I'm not going through all the sliders and trying to refine it and make it perfect. This is just how automatic and accurate is the sky. Also, you'll notice that there's a bird there, and that bird stayed, whereas over here, the bird is gone as far as I can tell. Let me look at the sky. Actually, you know what? The bird, it's right there, and if you look now, there's a tiny little bit of him coming through. So it like mostly overrode the bird, but it didn't. But again, the reflection, if I turn that back on here, it's really doing nothing for me. Whereas the reflection here is actually not bad. If I turn that off, there it is before, and there it is after. So actually that looks pretty good to me. Also, the scene relighting in Luminar is automatic, whereas over here it's not. You'd have to come adjust the scene lighting, and in this case, I'd want to make it kind of more of a pink color, something like that. I don't know, but you'd have to refine the mask around some of these turrets or tops of these castle spires, whatever they're called, and the reflection, you'd pretty much just have to completely redo that. Whereas over here, I think you could refine the mask a little bit, but I think the reflection's not bad. Actually, now that I look at it, if you look down here, the reflection in this darker area is not quite as good. I feel like there ought to be a little bit more reflection in there. So again, not perfect. Neither tool is perfect, just to be clear. And that's honestly kind of the point of the video, that, it's not exactly, heads or tails, a toss of the coin. I do feel like Luminar is doing a better, more accurate job more often, but On1 is certainly performing pretty well a fair amount of images. So let me go to another one and do another comparison. Now this one's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit darker, a little bit more challenging, I think, but we're going to stick a new sky in and see if we can make that comparison. So once again, grab a personal sky folder and go grab that sky, and you can already see what it's doing before that sky's in. It's dropping the sky all the way down to there. So if you look at the mask, for some reason it thinks that's part of the sky, whereas in reality it should be part of the reflection. So you would need to adjust things pretty considerably there. On top of that, let me get out of the masking view. If you get up here and look, it's all over those trees, and so again, it's going to require a fair amount of refinement, and it looks like also along the horizon you're going to need some help. Now let me turn on the reflection, because that's not the reflection. That still thinks it's a sky. If I turn on the reflection, on and off, it didn't really do anything. The only thing I see is a little bit in this bottom left corner coming in, but honestly the reflection is not picking up at all. Having said that, the water's pretty dark. It's version 1 of the tool. I don't necessarily expect it to be perfect in situations like that. Now if I pop in a Luminar with the same image and grab that same sky, we're going to see how that performs. And there you go. Now the masking needs help, right? So you could fix those kind of things with these mask refinement tools. I'll just drag them all over here to the right and kind of see if that helps. And, something like that, because it's very distracting. So to be clear, it didn't, actually that looks pretty good now. Automatically, it didn't give me that. So the initial impression of the mask was not ideal, but that quick fix actually looks pretty darn good, to be honest. I'd say around the horizon, it's pretty good. It's not perfect. It looks like it's missing a spot there, but the reflection picked up automatically, and I think that looks pretty good. So if I turn this off, you can see if you look at just the water and the reflection, you can see that it's picking up some of that color, a little bit of the reflection on the cloud, which because the water's kind of choppy, I wouldn't expect it to get a reflection. I would expect it just to get some of the scenery lighting. So, again, nothing's perfect, and this is not perfect either, and this obviously requires a little bit of work, especially around the masking, and I would say relighting some of the scene, which you can do. But if you compare this over here, I would say a large part of these tree branches have been eaten, and it's thinking that the sky is down there. So if you look at the horizon shift, you can see what's happening. There's the line right there. So it was dropping it automatically down into the 2/3 of the water. So not quite recognizing it. Again, version 1 of the tool, fairly dark water, but I would say Luminar picked it up a little bit better here. But neither one of them is perfect, and both are going to require a little bit of work to get them looking the way you want them to look. Okay, and back to this image. Now, I used this one in my first impression video, but I thought it was a good one to end on because I think On1 did a really good job here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is, and I'm going to zoom further, and that is, once again, the sky is eating these little narrow, tiny things that are in the sky. I find in On1, it's eating them a lot of the time. Like in that very first image where there's not very much of that and it's straight, hard lines, rectangular shapes, things like that, hard edges, it's working pretty well on those. But when you get into these finer details, it feels like it's having a little bit of a struggle. But the reflection picks up pretty well, and I think that looks pretty nice. And interestingly, the reflection, I think, is looking better around these little spires than it is in the sky. It's a little bit tighter, and it's not overriding them quite like it is in the sky. So if I show you the before and the after, just in the reflection, if you look, there it is before and after. Those little tiny spires and the reflection are holding their own, whereas up here in the sky, they seem to be a little bit challenged. Now let's go look at Luminar and do this same sky, and there it is, and let's let that drop in. And there you go. Once again, it does an automatic job on the reflection, and you will see it's actually brighter in On1 than it is in Luminar. That's gone in. That looks more like the way the base image looked, because if you remember, the base image was fairly bright. It's a gray overcast day, but a fairly bright exposure. That's sort of maintained the brightness. Whereas here, if I turn off Sky AI, there's the brightness, and the scenery lighting has really darkened it quite a bit. Kind of makes sense because it's a darker sky shot from, well, the sky was shot in Wyoming, and this is in Denmark. So completely different. And by the way, to be clear, I'm not saying this sky goes in all these photos. It's just I felt the fairest thing to do is pick one sky and use it on every image so that I could do a fair comparison. But you might need to adjust scene lighting over here. You might want to add a little bit stronger reflection. But I would say in terms of accuracy, let's go into 200 again. If you look up here, these spires, they're just coming through a little bit more strongly than they are in On1. Now, the masking around this, again, you need to kind of go fix details and things like that. And if you look around some of these trees, it's not perfect. It needs some help as well around some of these trees. And even though those are very distant, they're still going to maybe look a little bit off even when I back up. So, if you look over here, let me go back to 200. That's a little bit better. If you look at these trees over here, they've got not a halo, but a little bit of a pink halo kind of around them. So you need to refine that. And if you go back to On1, you're not having that issue because the pink in the sky is not hitting over there, and the scenery lighting, which I could do, isn't really affecting that. So let me go and change that scenery lighting to a little bit more pink, maybe something more like that. And if I zoom in, let's see, zoom in and move over here a little bit. It looks pretty good there, honestly. Whereas in Luminar, zoomed in to 200 over here, I think you need to do a little bit of work here in terms of how that mask is hitting those trees. But overall, it's just interesting. The fine details here on the top of the castle come in, but the finer details on some of the trees aren't masking as well. Whereas over here, it's kind of the reverse. It seems to be doing an okay job there on those trees, but up here on the top of the castle, those clouds are just kind of wiping out some of that, the top of the castle, those spires and those finer details. So like I said, your mileage may vary. Every photo is going to be different. I think On1 is, it's a first effort. I think it's fine. I think it's solid. It's not perfect. Luminar is not perfect either, and we're on version, I don't know what version to be honest, but there's been multiple iterations of the tool. It's been out a couple years, I think, or something like that. So I would expect that it's going to be more advanced, and I'm hopeful that it'll continue to advance and mature as Luminar Neo comes out. And I do expect the same thing with On1, where they're going to continue to refine their machine learning modules or models or whatever they're called, and that AI is going to get better and more accurate. Both really good tools, both very useful, and I think it really just depends on the image. Sometimes it's working a little bit better on one tool and a little bit better on the others, and sometimes there's a bigger disparity between one working, how one works compared to how the other one works. I would say in summary, your mileage may vary, as I said, and depending on the image and depending on which image editor you prefer to use, that might be the tool that you use best. I'm personally going to continue to do most of my sky replacements in Luminar. I feel like that tool is giving me overall more accurate results more often, and even if I have to go refine things with the sliders, and even though I don't have access to the mask, I'm finding that I'm getting closer more often than I am over in On1. But again, it's version 1 versus version, I don't even know what version in Luminar, but a couple of years worth of version. So it could be version 3 or 4, I don't really know. The point is, it's a more mature tool. I would expect it to be more accurate more often. But again, I think it's going to come down to personal preference and which tool you use. And frankly, how often are you doing sky replacements? It's a fun, artistic thing to do. I enjoy doing it for videos, but I don't sit around and think, okay, I didn't get great conditions, I'm just going to replace the sky every time. And I know the purest landscape photographers out here in the world, they're going to prefer to just have their own skies that they captured when they were capturing the photo as well, right? They want it to be real and not just a crutch that you can lean on. So I'm not getting into the debate here about the principles of doing it. I'm fine with it for artistic purposes, but I feel like it should be disclosed. But that's personal opinion. Regardless, I just wanted to compare some of the tools. I think it's great that there are multiple tools. I didn't even include Photoshop in this, and their tool does that as well. But I'm not a big Photoshop person. I do like On1 quite a bit, and you already know that I like Luminar quite a bit. I just wanted to compare them and share my findings so far. I'll keep doing some tests, see what else comes up, and if I find something unique or interesting or different about something, I'll be sure to let you know. Thanks for watching, my friends. Appreciate it very much. You guys take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next video. And adios.